Welcome to Interpreters and Interrupters. I'm your host, Maritza. Today, I'm accompanied by Athena Matilsky, legal interpreter. She is the first legal interpreter we've had on the show. Good morning, Athena. How are you?
Good morning, Maritza. I'm great. How are you?
Wonderful. Let's start by you telling us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so I'll start when I was 16. I had spoken only English until I was 16 years old. And then I started community college, and there was a required course for language. And I picked Spanish because it fit my schedule. And I fell completely in love with Spanish and also with the idea of being able to communicate in another language. I really loved the idea that it kind of opened a door into a whole new universe. And now, a bunch of years later, I have some friends who only speak Spanish or who only speak French who I never would have been able to be friends with if I hadn't learned my other languages. So that's kind of when my language journey began. And pretty quickly, I decided I wanted to be an interpreter. I decided I wanted to major in Spanish when I entered a 4-year program at Rutgers University. And that major, you could pick a track. You could pick linguistics, you could pick literature, or you could pick interpreting and translation. And I was really drawn to the idea of interpreting and translation because they're very practical. I love linguistics and literature, but it would have kind of kept me in a university setting, and I wanted to be out in the world, in the field. As it turns out, I actually do quite a bit of teaching, and I also work in a university setting as well. I get to do a lot of different things. I just love interpreting, so here we are now.
Is there someone in particular that sparked that flight of becoming an interpreter?
At the beginning, I didn't know anybody who was an interpreter, but my mom had a colleague, I think it was a friend of a friend who she knew, who was very kind to me and spoke to me on the phone for a half hour, 45 minutes, and kind of told me what it was like to be a court interpreter in New Jersey. I met another friend of a friend who knew somebody at the UN who talked to me about that, and that kind of, in the back of my head, had always been and continues to be an idea of working for the UN. So along the way, I started to meet people and I would always pick their brains. And then through my program at Rutgers University, I did several internships. And there I was able to meet more interpreters. I was able to follow them around in a hospital setting, in a court setting, see how they worked. And it was just always so exciting and nerve-wracking and scary. But I was always really, really excited to become an interpreter.
Athena, what was your first job as an interpreter? How did you start your career being paid?
Sure, because I was going to say it depends on how you count job, because my first unpaid job, I was working at a clinic in New Brunswick, New Jersey. I would come at 9 a.m., I would sit on a little chair in the corridor, and then the doctors would just come and get you, and they would come and get you quite frequently. There were pediatric doctors, there were dentists. It was a clinic that kind of did everything. So I saw a whole lot of different things. There were a bunch of unpaid internships, but I think my first paid job, actually, I think it might have been in New York City. It's strange, sort of the things that come your way. I had sent my resume out to a whole bunch of different agencies, and I got a call from an agency that they were filming a documentary, and they wanted an interpreter in the documentary to be interpreting answers and questions that they were asking. It was about people who had food carts in New York City. Unfortunately, I never actually saw the end of the documentary. I was involved in the filming process, but I never got any follow-up. So somewhere out there, I am interpreting in a documentary about food carts in New York City.
When did you decide to go to legal interpreting?
I don't know how I got it in my head, but it had always been my plan. I was going to start with medical interpreting. I don't know why. I think it's a problem to this day that medical interpreting tends to be a little bit undervalued. And when I say a little bit, I mean a lot. There's a very big difference in how much you get paid as a medical interpreter versus a court interpreter. And there's fewer standards. The certification process, you probably know this, very recent at all, that they're asking for people to be certified as medical interpreters. But what that meant for me as a fledgling interpreter is that it allowed me to get my foot in the door. And I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the medical interpreting. But I always had it in my mind that I kind of wanted to also try court interpreting and eventually conference interpreting, which is kind of where I ended up. So I've had experience in all three branches, so to speak, of interpreting.
When I started, I wanted to be a legal interpreter, but I failed the certification test in my state. I took the test again and I failed it again. And the most frustrating part is that both times I failed it by like 2 points. So I was almost there, but I was tired of paying, tired of taking the test. I looked at medical interpreting, but at the time, 2007, minimum wage at hospitals here where I live was $16 an hour with a maximum of 22. That has continued to move up slowly in the hospitals here where I live. And now here we are, 2025. From 2007 to 2025, it's a minimum of $24 an hour, and you can make as much as 36. In the hospital where I work, interpreters are required to be certified 2 years after taking the job.
The first time I took my court interpreting exam, I did pass the simultaneous and sight translation sections, but I failed the consecutive interpreting section by 2 points. So I had to redo the process. And I tell people this because it can be very demoralizing when you don't pass an exam. And sometimes people get into this failure mentality where they've failed once, now they're certain that they'll fail again. And it can be very difficult to break out of that. The other thing I wanted to comment on was the treatment of medical interpreters. I'm still a medical interpreter and I do take medical assignments, but it's not the bulk of what I do. And part of that is because not only do we tend to be devalued at a monetary level, but also not as respected, kind of treated like we're not carrying out a profession or a career. And I specifically remember over the years, I've kind of figured out how to, you shouldn't be alone with a patient. If you're alone with the patient, the doctor is gone, there's so much opportunity to start a conversation, and that's fine, like just having a conversation, as you know. But so often it then becomes, oh, let me tell you about my medical problems. Let me ask you for advice. Let me try to set you up with my son. You seem like you'd really get along. And so after that happened, and I started to learn, okay, when the doctor says I'm stepping out for 5 minutes, then they leave for 45 minutes. And now it's awkward and I can't just sit there ignoring somebody that's rude. So what I started to do is I would say, okay, I would interpret what the doctor said, I'll be right back. And I would then say, I will be right back. And then I have nowhere to go. So I would just stand in the hallway right outside the room. And that way we're not going to end up with any awkward ethical dilemmas inside alone with the patient. But I had a nurse come by one time and she was like, you're supposed to be in there translating. And I'm like, I'm not telling you how to do your job. How about you don't tell me how to do my job? But I felt like I ran into that so often. And now as a court interpreter, they call me Madam Interpreter.
So one thing that I miss, the respect.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice to feel respected. And it's really frustrating because these are life and death situations we're talking about with medical interpreting. It's not like it's an easier field or anything like that. So it's very frustrating. But I'm sorry, you had asked me about court interpreting and now it went sideways.
Thank you for the encouragement, because a year ago I took the medical certification test and I thought to myself, oh, here we go again. I'm going to miss it by 2 points and I don't have $400 laying around to take it again. Oh my gosh, it was so easy for me. I passed it with flying colors. I was so excited. I even ran out of time. I still passed it because I had the 10-minute translation part, which is funny because it's not really translating, but anyway. So thank you for thank you for the encouragement, because I want our listeners to know that it's a whole different ballgame. Regardless of what subject it is, you're stressed out. The environment might not be to your liking. In my case, they gave me like 3 sheets of paper and a pencil, and I'm like, okay, if my pencil breaks, then what? Oh, you just ask us for another one. Well, yeah, but there's a time test. I don't have time to stand up and flag, you could give me another pencil. Why don't you just give me a pen? A pen is not allowed. Anyway, that's my take on testing.
I was interested in interpreting in general. And I was drawn to court interpreting partly by the respect and by the possibility of earning more money. I would say it was very intimidating. So I don't know, maybe I think throughout my career, I've been drawn to things that are scary. And I was saying this to a student the other day. I just feel like I've gone from thing to thing that is scary, and then once it stops being scary, I find a new thing that's scary. Sometimes I'm like, maybe I should slow down a bit and actually do some more fun things. And actually, I had an opportunity to be a circus interpreter a couple of years ago, and that was fabulous. Right now, I'm kind of like, yeah, let's look for fewer things that are scary and look for things that are just exciting and fun. There's an opportunity to interpret in the jungle in Colombia. I might follow through on that one. I don't know if there was anything particular about court interpreting necessarily, but it just seemed like the logical progression from where I was going. And it seemed like the next challenge. So that's kind of what landed me in court interpreting. And then I ended up being in court interpreting for quite a while, and that is the bulk of what I do. It's the bulk of the trainings that I give. So it was kind of by fluke, but also I think it was a logical career progression for me.
In regards to training, what kind of training did you do for legal interpreting?
The courses that I took at Rutgers University did prepare me for medical and court interpreting. I took a medical interpreting class that had a medical interpreting internship component. I also took legal interpreting courses at Rutgers. So that was the basis for my training. Then when I graduated, I did more internships, more unpaid internships. I did a 80-hour legal interpreting internship and a 70-hour court interpreting internship. One of those was somebody who worked at legal services. So they were an agency, a nonprofit organization that provided legal help to people who didn't have enough money to hire their own attorneys. And that was really, really interesting. I got to know some of the staff interpreters very well and found out a lot about what it was like to be an interpreter. And then the other internship that I had was in a courthouse in New Jersey, where again, I was able to follow interpreters around. And that's still a courthouse that I do interpret for from time to time. Following the internships, I also took another community college training course. I did a lot of self-study. So I bought all of the Acebo books, Interpreter's Edge, Edge
Yes.
21.
The Turbo Interpreter.
The Turbo.
Also by Acebo.
Yes. Which I tell students, the Turbo, do it to practice being scared and interpreting anyway. Do not do it to try to be perfect. It is impossible. It's a set of materials that's extremely challenging. But it's really good for being like, okay, can I keep my composure? Can I keep going even when I'm missing half of the information? And that's important to be able to do that, especially on an exam where you don't have a moment to say, excuse me, Your Honor, may the interpreter pause to clarify, or may the interpreter request that somebody slow down. So you need to practice that. Not that in real life you should be okay with missing 50% of the information, but you do need to be ready for capturing what you can capture and then pausing when you can't and bringing that to the attention of the court.
Then you transition into federal court interpreting. I know that the U.S. federal court test is weird. You take the written test, and then the next year you take the oral test.
That is true. It alternates every other year written exam, every other year oral exam, although it sounds like this year they held the oral exam and it sounds like they're going to do that again next year. And actually today, I think a bunch of my students are going to be receiving their results for the federal exam. I had a really intense masterclass earlier this year for people specifically who are studying to become federal court interpreters. And we've been waiting and waiting and waiting for the results. They took their exams back in August and we're now in November, and they should be getting their results soon. The exam is very challenging. It's very similar to the state exam, but harder. The written exam component is more difficult. I honestly did not have any idea if I had passed or not when I took the written exam. It's like a very hard college level reading comprehension, synonyms, idioms, just all the different elements of English, and then also all the different elements of Spanish. And you have to get, I believe you have to get a 75% or higher to pass the written exam. And then when it comes to the oral exam, you have to get an 80% or higher, which is different from across the board. In most states in the United States, you need only a 70% to get certified at the state level. But for federal certification, you need that 80%. It has site translations that are maybe similar to what you'd see at a state level, although possibly higher register, especially for the Spanish. The consecutive is similar again, but they give you less time. And I actually did run out of time, same as you, during my consecutive section. However, I did pass. And I tell my students that as well, because if you just let something like that throw you off, you might not pass, because you're going to be thinking, oh, I ran out of time. I've obviously flunked. And you get in that flunk mentality, and then you don't focus for the rest of the exam. So I tell people that, because even if one section of the exam doesn't go as well as you were hoping, stay focused, cry about it later. But in the moment, keep on focusing. Then there's a simultaneous, which is similar to the state, but then there's another component that instead of 120 words a minute, we're now 160 words a minute. So it's kind of like the state exam, but everything's a little bit harder and you have less time and there's more stress because it's only held once, usually every other year. So I did do my like crazy nerding out studying process for the federal exam, similar to what I had done for state certification, or in New Jersey, what's called approval. And I did, by the skin of my teeth, pass the federal exam. At the point that I had passed it, I was actually already working full-time as a staff interpreter in New Jersey. So even though I became certified at the federal level, I didn't really have much of an opportunity to work in federal court because I was already working full-time at the state court level. If I do have the certification, I have been in federal court, I have interpreted there, but not very much, just because my life kind of led me in other directions.
On your page, Athena Sky Interpret, you say that you're a geek interpreter. Tell me a little bit more about that.
I've had a lot of conversation with a younger friend of mine between the difference between a geek and a nerd. So maybe I'm more of a nerd than a geek. I don't know. But the point is that I dive deep. I study quite a lot. So when I say that I'm a geek interpreter, what I mean is I get down to the nitty gritty. And this is really what I encourage my students to do too. It can be very hard to separate your ego from everything else, right? And so a lot of people are scared to listen to a recording of themselves interpreting. But that is absolutely what we have to do if we want to identify what is working and what is not working. And I tell people, colleagues can lie, they can try to not hurt your feelings. A recording will show you how it is. And if you can be intelligent about the way that you evaluate your recording, you can learn so much. So a big problem when people are preparing for their exams is that they'll just look at vocabulary. They're just, okay, I have to memorize a bunch of vocabulary. And that's true. You do have to memorize a bunch of vocabulary, but it is one small piece of what has to be done. You have to have light laser focus. You have to be able to do great multitasking. You have to be able to reformulate grammar and syntax so that you can sound natural in one language versus the other. And in order to do that, you need to automate certain skills. So for example, and you probably know this already, but when you're note taking for consecutive, you can't be sitting there thinking, oh, what symbol should I use next? Or you also can't be thinking, oh my goodness, when will this person stop talking? Because whenever you think that sort of a thought, it distracts you from actually listening and becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy when you're like, oh my gosh, when will this person stop talking? And so because you need to automate things, because things need to happen automatically, and because you need to develop the neural pathways in your brain, this is why I'm a geek, you need repetition. You need to be able to try an interpreting exercise, listen to your recording, identify what's working, identify what's not working, and then try again from a different angle. This time I will try just listening. I'm going to focus 100% of my energy on just listening. This time I'm going to listen and take notes. Now I'm going to look at my notes and I'm going to say, oh, okay, this is superfluous. I didn't need to write the word did. There's no translation of the word did in any other language that I've ever met. So I don't need to write did. Did means question. I could write a question mark. And so now I start picking apart my notes and improving my notes. And now can I put the listening and the note taking together? So it's just this whole process of being meticulous and also understanding I will hear my own mistakes. I'm going to hear myself say silly things. I'm going to hear myself mispronounce words. I'm going to hear myself omit things. I'm going to hear myself change information. That's embarrassing. I acknowledge my embarrassment. I put it to the side and I work on becoming a better interpreter. And that, in a nutshell, is what I mean when I say being a geek interpreter.
One of the problems that I had in medical interpreting was the syntax. Because in legal interpreting, yes, we're supposed to interpret everything that is said and how it's said. And it's the same in medical. So now what I'm doing is that I'm not interpreting word for word. I'm going for the meaning. And that has helped me so much in syntax. Am I leaving anything out? No, I'm not. I'm just saying it in a way that is understandable. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh, 100%. When people have this thing, because everyone's always talking about going word for word and providing a word-for-word interpretation. And then because people get stuck on scoring units in exams, we can get really fixated on the word itself. I had an interesting conversation about this yesterday with a colleague, actually on the word rape kit. I had to interpret this very play-by-play, sentence-by-sentence description of a sexual assault. But the word rape kit, I was getting fixated on the word kit, right? And kit can mean like your toolbox, or it can mean just like your set of tools that you're using for a thing. But really, when you say this term, you're referring to a series of tests that's done to a victim to determine whether or not there's DNA that might match with somebody out there who committed that assault. And so the translation that we found in Spanish was more of a description of that. It was basically saying the forensic exam for victims of rape. And that actually makes more sense in Spanish than it does in English when you say it, because when you say it in English, it doesn't really tell you what it is. But there's a lot of that, and it's a lot of like detaching yourself from the original language and then understanding truly what it is that is trying to be communicated and rendering that in the other language. So there's a lot involved, of course. You had asked me for 3 tips for test taking. Number 1 is just put the work in. So carve out time in your schedule, take it seriously. I would recommend at least 3 months before an exam begins that you start getting serious about your test preparations, that you study 2 hours a day, 3 to 4 times a week for 3 months. That's kind of what I've seen for myself and my students. It's something where you can maintain that kind of momentum. If you say, I'm going to study every single day, all day long for 8 months, I've met people who tell me that, and then they never come to the second class. It's like they've bitten off more than they could chew, and now they can't do any of it. So make it reasonable, but put it in your calendar. Another thing is find people who will keep you accountable. So find study buddies, ask your family to keep you accountable, put it on your wall, put it in your calendar. Like, don't just say that you're going to study, but actually study. And another tip that I have is to work with materials that are specifically made for interpreting. So a lot of people are like, oh, I'll go onto YouTube, I interpret. It's not bad. It's good to get that practice. But there are materials out there that have been created specifically for interpreters based on real court proceedings that have a transcript. And even in some cases, like I work a lot with the Interpretrain materials, which were developed by Virginia Valencia. And they come with vocabulary exercises. They come with all sorts of different vocabulary exercises with teacher sample interpretations so that you can compare what you've said to the interpreter. And those really provide a nice way to work on your skills. And I know that's 3, but just one more thing is that when you go in to take an exam, expect that you will make mistakes. Expect that you'll say things that are silly. Expect that the vocabulary you studied just last week that you had on the tip of your tongue is going to go out the window and you're going to miss something that you should have gotten. Expect that to happen. And then when it does happen, you take a deep breath. You say there is a margin for error. On all interpreting exams, there's always a margin for error. You take a deep breath. I'm the best interpreter there ever was, and you keep going.
Athena, what do you have going on? Tell me about your upcoming courses in Athena Sky Interpreting.
Absolutely. So our next big thing is our master class that is starting this coming January 2026, and I'm still accepting applications right now. You would apply, and then if you're accepted for an interview, I'll contact you for an interview. And we sit down and we have a conversation just to make sure we're on the same page, because it's a really intense program. It's a big investment of energy and on everybody's part. And so I want to make sure that everybody knows what they're getting into. And what they're getting into is a 10-week program where we cover all 3 modes of interpreting. We have a mock exam. We have a performance evening. Part of the idea is, yes, you're getting feedback and you're improving your interpreting skills, but also you're making yourself nervous and you're having to interpret under pressure with an audience in some cases. And that will force you to master your nerves and to be like, okay, this is what it feels like to be jittery, but to interpret anyway. This is what it feels like to be nervous, but to rely on all the skills that I've developed over this last period of time. It's a holistic program, which I warn people about in advance because it's not everyone's cup of tea, but we do incorporate breathing exercises and centering exercises, sometimes even journaling exercises, to really understand what is going on, what kind of mental chatter do we have in our heads, what kind of negative voices do we have inside of our heads. My Spanish will never be good enough, I'll never pass this test. And how can we change the narrative, inject some confidence into ourselves and our interpretation, and also silence some of that nervous chatter so we can focus on what we need to do, which is the interpreting. So for the class, you meet twice a week with your instructors, which will include myself and my lovely executive assistant, Lily, who is a Japanese interpreter. And then you will meet with your study group as well once a week, and you'll complete homework assignments. This is for all languages. So there's a special Spanish add-on package for Spanish-specific materials. But if you speak different languages, and we've had Armenian interpreters, Japanese, Korean, Mandarin, French over the years, you will be guided through the process of using English-specific materials and tailor them to your own language so that you can then have language-specific interpreting exercises no matter who you are, and all the while building a community repository, a community glossary, so that future masterclass students will also benefit from the legacy that you leave and the materials that you help to compile and create. So it's really cool. This is going to be like the 7th masterclass that I've taught, I believe. And that's the big thing that we have coming up. I am also teaching class on Zen and the art of interpreting. And that's going to be with Glendon Master's Conference Interpreting Program. They're doing a community series that will be open to everybody. That will be happening this February. and I'll be posting some of this stuff to my website soon. And I'm hoping to create more webinars for 2026 because my focus has really been on master classes these last couple of years. But I feel like what's lacking right now is just more classes for the general public, people who might not be able to invest in a 10-week class, but who do want more continuing education or just to take a couple of prep classes. And I may be doing some regional conferences as well. So stay tuned for that.
Yes, please stay tuned. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, Athena.
Thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure, and I appreciate your time as well.